My dad loved to fish, and my mom loved to garden. So it really immersed me in nature at a very young age.
His charm lit up the screen. His legacy built an empire. But behind the Hollywood icon, Paul Newman was a man haunted by demons few ever saw. Now, at 63, his daughter is breaking her silence, finally revealing the untold truth about their private pain. The nights were filled with tension. The secrets are buried beneath smiles, the heartbreaking moments that shaped their family forever. From his struggles with fatherhood to the words he whispered before his final breath, this emotional, raw story will completely reshape how you remember the man behind the myth. The fight for Paul Newman's legacy. Now, before we dive into the secret that Paul Newman's daughter revealed, let's first take a thoughtful glance at the remarkable legacy he left behind. Paul Newman, an 8-time Oscar nominee and winner of 3 Academy Awards, was more than just a Hollywood legend. He was a philanthropist, businessman, race car driver, and above all, a devoted family man. His striking blue eyes and rugged charm made him a fixture on the big screen. But it was his compassionate heart and sense of justice that made his legacy endure far beyond his passing in 2008. From starring in classics like Cool Hand Luke, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and The Color of Money, to co-founding the beloved food empire Newman's Own, Newman poured his soul into everything he did. But what began as a family-rooted venture took a dramatic turn following his death. Newman's Own, launched with his daughter Nell in 1993, wasn't just about wholesome organic foods. It was about giving back. Every penny of profit was donated to charity, an idea Paul cherished deeply. Nell, his eldest daughter, co-founded Newman's Own Organics and played a pivotal role in the organic food movement. From Santa Cruz, California, she spearheaded the release of organic pretzels and fig Newtons, pushing healthy food into mainstream markets. Her charisma and passion, mirroring her father's, made her a symbol of the brand. But in 2015, something changed. Her image, once featured beside her father's, in a pose reminiscent of American Gothic, was abruptly removed from the label. Soon after, Nell seemed to disappear from the company altogether. For a family so closely tied to the brand's mission, it was a bewildering move. Beneath the surface, tensions were boiling. Paul had entrusted the management of his estate to close advisor Robert Forrester and business manager Brian Murphy, with the possibility of a third executor to be chosen by his daughters. But rather than uniting the family around their father's values, this decision fractured them. Susan Kendall Newman, another of Paul's daughters, expressed deep concern in an interview with Vanity Fair, stating, "There isn't a single living Newman who respects or has faith in Robert Forrester." The heart of the issue lay in control. The family believed Forrester mismanaged the $600 million estate and distanced the company from the values Paul stood for. They accused him of making lavish decisions and betraying the spirit of Newman's Own. However, the family's hands were tied. A strict no-contest clause in Paul's will prevented them from legally challenging its terms without forfeiting their rights to any inheritance. Though Forrester was eventually removed in 2019 following allegations of inappropriate behavior by female employees, the damage to the Newman family's trust was done. Melissa Newman, Paul's youngest daughter, chose a quieter way to preserve her parents' memory through a photo book titled Head Over Heels. In it, she shared never-before-seen moments of her parents away from the limelight, simple joys like fishing, cooking, and tender gestures exchanged between two people who truly loved each other. Melissa remembered how her father would gently pinch her mother's waist as he passed by, or how the spark between them never dimmed during their 50-year marriage. These moments stood in stark contrast to the corporate turmoil that followed his death. The Newman children weren't just fighting for control, they were fighting for the soul of their father's legacy. But what's the story behind the man who built this powerful legacy? The answer might surprise you. The secrets he tried to bury. The camera loved Paul Newman, but the spotlight never reached the parts of his life he kept buried. Long after the curtain had fallen on his public triumphs, it was his daughter who would open the door to the past, revealing a side of her father few ever imagined. Behind the charisma was a man weighed down by personal guilt, a fractured family, and a haunting truth he only dared to speak as life slipped away. His drinking, the tragedy of his son's overdose, and a final deathbed confession. These pieces reshaped everything once thought to be true about him. Paul Leonard Newman was born on January 26, 1925, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. His roots were steeped in a blend of cultures. His father, Arthur Newman, was Jewish, descended from Hungarian and Polish immigrants. His mother, Teresa, came from Slovak heritage. The family ran a successful sporting goods store in Shaker Heights, an upper-class suburb where Paul never lacked for material comfort, but comfort didn't shield him from prejudice. The neighborhood was predominantly Christian, and anti-Semitism was common.
That shows anti-Jewish sentiment around the world is at its highest level since...
A stinging memory stayed with him, being denied entry into a high school fraternity simply because of his father's religion. It was an early lesson in exclusion, one that would leave a lasting impression on his sense of identity. Despite these tensions, Paul's childhood was also rich with creativity. At the age of 7, he stepped into his first role, Robin Hood, in a school play. That early taste of acting sparked something deep within him. It wasn't a career yet, just a joyful escape. He later joined the Cleveland Playhouse's Children's Theater, performing in plays like St. George and The Dragon, where his love for storytelling quietly grew. In 1943, after finishing high school, Paul enrolled at Kenyon College with plans to study economics. But like many young men of his time, his path was interrupted by war. Later that same year, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, aiming to become a pilot. A routine eye test revealed he was colorblind, grounding those ambitions. Instead, he was trained as a radio man and rear gunner for torpedo bombers. By 1945, he was stationed in Hawaii, preparing to join the Pacific battlefront. His unit was scheduled to board the USS Bunker Hill for the Okinawa campaign. But at the last moment, his pilot was sidelined by an ear infection. The crew was held back. Days later, kamikaze pilots attacked the Bunker Hill, killing hundreds, including many in Paul's unit. That ear infection had spared his life. It was a brush with death that he would never forget. He left the Navy with service medals in hand, the American Area Campaign Medal and the Second World War Victory Medal. But more importantly, with a deep shift in perspective. Life, he realized, was fragile and unpredictable. He had been given a second chance. Back at Kenyon College, Paul's interest in economics faded as the stage drew him in again. He joined the drama club shining in The Front Page, Charlie's Aunt, and The Taming of the Shrew. His performance in Charlie's Aunt, as a man in disguise, brought laughter to a campus recovering from tragedy. He also wrote and directed a satirical musical about college life, revealing not just talent, but a storyteller in the making. Yet even as his star rose in public, darker struggles quietly took hold. The making of a legend. That near-death brush during the war may have changed his perspective, but it was the stage that gave him a reason to live with purpose. Though academics often left him struggling, acting was where he felt most alive. After graduating from Kenyon College in 1949, Paul Newman's path took an unexpected turn. A year later, his father died, and the weight of responsibility landed squarely on his shoulders. He took over the Newman Stern sporting goods store in Cleveland, a business that had thrived since 1915 and was one of the most prominent in the city. But Paul felt no connection to it. For 18 long months, he ran the shop, drifting further into a life he didn't want. He would later admit he wasn't stepping into the role of a businessman. He was running from it. In 1951, with his heart no longer in retail, Paul made a bold decision. He packed up and left Cleveland for the Yale School of Drama. At first, he planned to study directing, convinced he lacked the raw talent needed for acting. But something changed. A year into Yale, the pull toward performance became impossible to ignore. He moved to New York City and began training under Lee Strasberg at the iconic Actors Studio. It was there that he learned the method acting techniques that would give his future characters a heartbeat. His first real break came in 1953, when he landed a role in Picnic, a Broadway play by William Inge. He had his sights on the lead, Hal Carter, but director Joshua Logan saw him differently. Instead, Newman was cast as Alan Seymour, a smaller part, but one that put him in front of packed theaters every night. The show was a hit, running for nearly 4 years. It wasn't the role he had dreamed of, but it was enough to open doors. More roles followed, and with them came recognition. In 1958, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof placed him beside Elizabeth Taylor, and his performance burned with quiet pain beneath a polished surface. Audiences saw more than a handsome face. They saw a man who could expose the wounds beneath the words. The performance earned him his first Academy Award nomination. Though the film didn't win, it positioned him among Hollywood's brightest. His piercing blue eyes, sharpened by the use of color film, quickly became part of his legend, talked about almost as much as his acting. By the early 1960s, Paul Newman was no longer an emerging talent. He was a cinematic force. In 1961, he played fast Eddie Felson in The Hustler.
Just had to show those creeps and those punks what the game is like when it's great, when it's really great.
A driven pool hustler with a cocky edge and a bruised heart. Newman delivered arrogance and fragility in equal measure, turning Felson into one of cinema's most unforgettable anti-heroes. The film earned 9 Academy Award nominations, including one for Newman. 2 years later, in 1963, he shocked audiences again in HUD. This time, he portrayed Hud Bannon, a selfish, morally broken rancher. Far from the classic cowboy, Hud was reckless and empty, a new kind of Western figure. The film won 3 Oscars and brought Newman another nomination. It was in Cool Hand Luke in 1967 that Paul Newman delivered one of his most iconic performances. As Luke Jackson, a defiant prisoner who refused to be broken, Newman embodied quiet rebellion. His smirking defiance became unforgettable. One line from the film, spoken by a guard, would echo through pop culture. "What we've got here is failure to communicate." By the late 1960s, his blue eyes were legendary. Though Newman never let vanity take over, he once joked, "Here lies Paul Newman, who died a failure because his eyes turned brown." But his body of work spoke louder than any headline ever could. But what happens when loyalty to one life quietly begins to unravel, all because of someone else? Keep watching. The fire that never went out. Love didn't bring calm. It upended everything. In 1953, backstage on Broadway, as understudies in Picnic, Paul met Joanne Woodward. He was married with 3 children.
For more than 50 years, Paul Newman was married to Joanne Woodward.
She was radiant, modern, and fiercely independent. Something dangerous passed between them, something that felt like a transgression before it ever became love. For 4 years, they kept their distance, but in 1957, they were cast opposite each other in the long, hot summer. Art imitated life, and the roles blurred with reality. Paul's marriage was falling apart, and Joanne's presence became impossible to ignore. She challenged him, understood him, and somehow saw past the mask he wore. He admired her clarity, her strength, the way she remained grounded while everything around them seemed to float on illusion. Choosing her, though, meant breaking his home. That decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. In 1958, after finalizing the divorce, Paul married Joanne in a quiet Las Vegas ceremony. They escaped to England for their honeymoon, hoping to outrun the stares and whispers of betrayal. But guilt is not a passport-stamped emotion. It followed him. Paul never denied that he'd hurt people, especially his children. He couldn't undo the damage or explain it well to them. Even in the glow of a new beginning, regret lingered, clouding moments of happiness with what-ifs. Their union lasted half a century, an eternity by Hollywood standards. They raised 3 daughters and built a life far from the flashbulbs in Connecticut. And still, The marriage carried cracks. Fame tugged at Paul, and alcohol often pulled him further away. There were whispers of emotional distance, of him retreating inward, haunted by mistakes and unable to fully articulate his sorrow. But Joanne stayed, not because it was easy, but because she loved the flawed man behind the polished actor. She saw the weight he carried and loved him anyway. He once joked, "Why go out for a hamburger when you have steak at home?" A line that sounded flippant, but was his way of shielding their bond from outside speculation. Joanne was more than his wife. She was his anchor. She gave him balance when chaos came knocking, listened through his silences, and saw the pain behind his legendary smile. But even love this deep couldn't protect them from tragedy. In 1978, their world split open. Paul's only son from his first marriage, Scott Newman, died of a drug overdose at just 28. The tabloids called it another Hollywood loss, but Paul felt it as judgment, a punishment for his failings as a father. He had played so many fathers on screen, but in real life, he had been absent, swallowed by career and public expectation. His grief was private, heavy, and nearly wordless. He didn't speak of it much, not even to Joanne. Yet he acted. Within months, he launched the Scott Newman Center, educating youth on substance abuse, a quiet apology to the son he couldn't save. But guilt doesn't evaporate with good deeds. Melissa, their daughter, once said her parents were never quite the same after Scott died. The pain didn't break them, but it hollowed something inside. They buried their son, but the blame lingered. Paul kept going. Movies, races, philanthropy, but the shadow of Scott's absence never left. It traveled with him, whispering in the quiet halls of their Connecticut home, where the loudest thing sometimes was the silence they couldn't escape. A quiet rebuild in Connecticut. It wasn't escape they sought. It was air. After the heartbreak of losing Scott and the exhaustion of a public life lived under bright lights, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward packed up what remained of their hearts and settled in a quiet corner of Connecticut. There were no velvet ropes, no paparazzi, just winding roads, tall trees, and a house built not for show, but for shelter. It became their reset button, their attempt at piecing together what fame and grief had cracked. The home wasn't lavish, it was intentional, a refuge from the noise, from the shadows that fame had cast on their family. Here, they raised their daughters Melissa, Nell, and Clea, not on movie sets or in the glare of premieres, but with books, backyard gardens, and family dinners that ran long into the night. Paul finally became present. Not the star on screen, but the man at the kitchen table, the father who showed up with hands that cooked and ears that listened. He was different now, still hurting, but trying. Determined not to repeat the silence that haunted him with Scott, he leaned into the moments he once missed. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be there. He chose roles more carefully now, stories that carried weight, not just spectacle. His ambition had softened into something more human. Meanwhile, Joanne remained calm, unshaken by the fame that still orbited them. They grew food, drove their own cars, and let celebrity slip quietly into the background. Their days moved slower, and that slowness healed, even as the ache of the past lingered. Paul rarely spoke of Scott, but the silence around his name spoke volumes. His regret followed him like a shadow, especially in the stillness of night, but the life they built in Connecticut allowed him space to sit with it and try, at last, to become the father, the man he always wanted to be. And just as life finally found its quieter rhythm, something unexpected reignited his spirit, something wild, something fast, where the engines roared and the giving began. And just like that, the silence of Connecticut gave way to the roar of engines. In his 40s, while many were easing into comfort, Paul Newman was racing toward something raw, something real. Hollywood had given him fame, but the track gave him freedom. What started as research for a role soon morphed into an obsession. He didn't flirt with racing, he dove in. Training with the intensity of a man chasing redemption, Paul didn't rely on celebrity privilege. He earned his place behind the wheel. In 1979, at the age of 54, he shocked the racing world at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, steering a Porsche 935 through relentless rain to a second-place finish.
A team which included actor Paul Newman was fifth in a Ferrari, about 190 miles off the pace.
It wasn't just a win. It was a moment that stitched pride into old regrets. But he wasn't done. In 1983, alongside Carl Haas, he launched Newman, Haas Racing, stepping boldly into IndyCar's unforgiving arena. Dismissed at first as a vanity project, the team silenced doubters with 108 victories and 8 championships. When they signed reigning Formula One champion Nigel Mansell in 1993, and he won the IndyCar title in his rookie season, Newman's quiet leadership was undeniable. Still, Paul never chased the spotlight, on or off the track. While others clung to fame, he poured his energy into something deeper. It began with a homemade salad dressing he gifted to friends. In 1982, with writer A.E. Hotchner, he turned it into Newman's Own, a food company with one audacious promise: give all the profits away. And they did. Over $570 million by the time Paul passed. There was nothing showy or promotional about it, just real help, quietly delivered to causes that mattered: cancer research, education, hunger relief, and justice initiatives. But Paul knew money alone wasn't enough. In 1988, he created the Serious Fun Children's Network, offering kids with serious illnesses a place to be wild, silly, and alive. The camps blended joy with medical care, laughter with healing. Today, dozens of these camps echo Paul's belief that even in suffering, joy is its own kind of medicine. Now, his daughter Clea continues the mission, not out of obligation, but out of love for the man who inspired it. Paul never sought fame or accolades. He simply wanted the right things to be done. But as Clea carries the torch forward, is it merely a legacy she inherited, or something deeper, something unsaid but always meant for her to find? One thing is certain: the story didn't end with Paul. The fragile brilliance of Paul Newman. In his final days, Paul Newman wasn't surrounded by flashing lights or the buzz of admiration. He was at home in Westport, Connecticut with Joanne Woodward, his wife of 5 decades, holding his hand as life quietly slipped away on September 26, 2008. At 83, after a private battle with lung cancer, the man who had captivated audiences across generations left the world not with grand speeches, but with whispers of regret and reflection. He didn't want applause. He wanted forgiveness. Paul had spent a lifetime building a legacy of charm, skill, and grace. He was Cool Hand Luke. He was Fast Eddie. He was the grinning icon with the twinkling blue eyes. But behind that familiar face was a man quietly unraveling. He spoke of Scott, his son who died in 1978 from a drug overdose, a wound he never fully healed from. That loss haunted him. He founded the Scott Newman Center to help others escape the path that had taken his boy. But the guilt never left. In his memoir, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man, Paul finally revealed what he'd buried for years: his deep insecurities, the mask of fame, and the ache of feeling like he never truly belonged. He described himself as a boy stuck in a man's body, anxious, unsure, and perpetually out of place. His mother's love felt like control, his father's silence like rejection. Hollywood gave him recognition, but not peace. His success, he confessed, often felt like a costume. The beauty, the fame, they distracted him from a deep inner emptiness he never knew how to fill. Even in his final performance, voicing Doc Hudson in Pixar's Cars in 2006, there was poetic symmetry.
If you're going hard enough left, you'll find yourself turning right.
I didn't come all this way to watch you quit. What about C?
Doc, a once great racer hiding from his past, reflected Newman's own history in motorsports and his growing awareness of age and legacy. When Cars 3 was released in 2017, Newman's voice returned through archival recordings. echoing from beyond with an honesty that felt more real than ever. By 2007, he retired from acting. His body was fading, but his spirit never gave in. He joked about the rumors surrounding his health, brushing them off with wit. But behind the humor was a man keenly aware of his own decline. His daughters, Melissa and Clea, carry his truth now. They remember a man who doubted himself, who loved quietly, who found joy in helping others more than basking in fame. His greatest work may not have been on screen. It might have been Newman's own, the food company he co-founded in 1982, turning homemade salad dressing into a legacy of philanthropy. But what do you think haunted Paul Newman more, his son's tragic death or the feeling that fame was just a mask? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.